This is the Inclusion Think Tank podcast brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education, where we talk about inclusive education, why it works, and how to make it happen. On today's episode, I welcome my guest, Dr. Heather Austin, Director of Special Services at Clark Public Schools. Today, Heather joins me to discuss her presentation from the All In Winter Conference titled The History of the Disability Rights Movement and Person First Language. We engage in a discussion about the history of the disability rights movement, the progress that still needs to be made, and how the way in which content is presented informs our own teaching practices and engagement in social spheres. I would like to welcome everyone back to a new episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. I'm your host, Arthur Aston, and today I'm joined by my guest, Dr. Heather Austin. So Heather, thank you for joining me today. I'm happy to have this conversation.
Great to be here. I'm so lucky to be sitting with you, Arthur.
Yeah, so you and we met at the recent winter conference that we held in Galloway in January. And so we're here to talk about your presentation and to get to know you and, the work that you do regarding inclusive education. So to start off the conversation, can you share a little bit about your story, some things that you like to do for fun, hobbies, or, books or movies that you enjoy, and also how you got into teaching and educating?
I appreciate that. Yes. So, I'll start with some of the kind of fun stuff. One of the things I like to do in my free time is I like to work on creating this ever-growing archive of our family history. I organize photographs, I label them. As a teenager, I used to audio record my grandparents tell stories about what it was like when they were growing up, and also sort of the life lessons. That was my idea of fun. It still is my idea of fun. And now that I think as you age, you become more reflective. I'm recognizing that it's important for me to write this down. And create what I think is a very user-friendly, accessible sort of archive for my children and their children. So I'm really quite passionate about that. I do that. In recent time, when I was a teenager, I played the harp very briefly. So I actually have a harp and I've been refurbishing it, cleaning it up, getting ready to start playing again. So now that my children are older, my youngest is 18, I'm finding I have a lot more free time. So I really need to find ways to fill this time. So that's what I'm doing. And one of the things I love about both things is that it's much more tactile and I get to, use my hands and my brain, and time flies. Um, so what else? So about me, I think I was sharing with you before that I think the person I am is composed of all of these wonderful experiences that I've had in my life. Um, I'm a single parent to my three children for much of our life together. And my oldest daughter, as I shared, has Down syndrome, and I found out in utero that she did have that, as well as a heart condition. And in the moments that followed that news, I realized that how I saw her and the value of her life, especially being so young, I was so young, and she was at her infancy clearly, that we would have a journey together in which we would be fortified by our efforts to advocate, to love each other very, very deeply, and also as her siblings joined. So my oldest is Nadia, and her siblings are Kalila and Eamon. That this journey together would really bring us so much love and deep gratification. And also, it was interesting. Understanding what her uniqueness was, what made her so special, was also brought about this question if I wanted to keep her. And I thought to myself, I've been given this great, huge decision-making capability around the way others perceive her life. And all I knew was that she was living and existing within me, and my job was to bring her into this world. And how could I stop the momentum of such greatness? So, in the course that followed, especially when she was born in her younger years, people would say, "Oh, you're so naive and you know, uh, sort of unrealistic about what you want for her." And I said, "No, no, no, no. I live in my own reality. No worries there." And we're forging ahead. And indeed, we did that. And I'm happy where we found ourselves. And I took that further into my work. How I got into education was I was an anthropology major. And when I had Nadia, I was beginning to finish up my coursework, and I recognized the greatest thing I could do was be very hands-on. So I really wanted to be very hands-on. That's one of the things I loved about studying anthropology and just doing those observations, but also as a result, what you could bring to the narrative in the field. And I said, well, I'm a young mom and I'm living here in the Northeast, and uh, what can I do? How can I get this great experience? And I thought, oh, you know what? I could be an educator because I can do that observation. I can contribute to a positive narrative. I can help families and I can grow in my own experiences. And I got into special education sort of, I think because I had the background with my administrator, he actually asked me to become more involved in special education. I think that I had the potential to see capability versus deficit. And so that was an important quality, I think, to bring to the field. And later down the road, I decided to get my doctorate because I recognized that if I could contribute to the body of work with my own research and therefore also doing more research by being in a doctoral program, I could hopefully assist others who are equally as passionate about it. So it's been a fun journey.
Yes, seeing capability rather than deficit, that was really great. And I also love what you said about, when you found out about your daughter's diagnosis in utero, and, saying like, who are you to stop that momentum of, who she is to become? Like, that is such a great positive outlook. I think about myself, where my parents, they didn't know that I had a disability until I was born, because I was born so many years ago. uh, they didn't have the those 3D ultrasounds and all those testings that are available now. And but I remember my mom saying that she pretty much had that same thought, like, okay, like, we'll make it work, and let's figure it out, and make it happen, because I was here for a purpose. So it's really great to hear that. And I related to you saying about your family history as well. Because of my disability, I couldn't, I didn't play sports or anything like that. So I spent a lot of time with my older, my grandparents and their siblings, and, hearing about family stories and things like that. So it's really, that is something that I'm really interested into learning about family history. So that's awesome that you're doing that.
Yeah, it's like, taking a peek at where we came from, and the
Mhm.
journey of others that have brought us to where we are today. Um, so definitely, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So my next question is, how do you define inclusive education?
So I think I've maintained the same definition throughout my time because I started thinking about inclusion when I was carrying my child. So, if I break it up into the realm of how services are delivered. We were in the 0 to 3 zone, right? So, I was trying to do early intervention before this kid even came into the world. I really look at it like, okay, well, what's the world we live in? Right? We live in a world where we all engage and interact and live and breathe experiences. And the school day happens from a start time to an end time. But life happens around that and continues on after school ends. So I was always looking at this big picture. So in my mind, inclusive education or inclusion as we see it in the school day, in the school building, should really mirror what life is like outside of that. The that we put emphasis on our social interactions, that we allow people to have agency and can choose a journey that is very, very meaningful to them. So the way I see inclusion in education is that it should be students coming to school to learn in a way that is meaningful to them, and that experience should happen with their peers. And if the way that we see that being done for the most of the students is in a classroom that that we can integrate in, then that should be the room, and that we should keep all the emphasis on that environment. And that our students should travel with each other throughout the experiences of the day. So I really strive to minimize the options or the discussions around moving students outside of that, because I do see it that we start to segregate them from their peers who have the greatest impact on their learning and with whom they will spend time with outside of school. They'll see that individual on the soccer field or at the Walgreens. They'll see that individual when they are 21, and reporting to school is no longer something that they do. So maybe they'll be sharing space in a company or in a job that they'll all work in. So I recognize that being able to provide that experience to them in a school day is very, very valuable, because it'll speak to what the truly the majority of their life is going to look like. Peers are so important as well, because I know my reach on my child, on any of my children, is limited. It's limited because I'm an older individual, that my lifetime has an end date, but people will continue to live on. So their connections with their peers become so much more meaningful, and I enjoy seeing who my own children and who my students are when they're informed by the people around them. You say, like, wow, you're great. Look at how much greater you're becoming. And it has nothing to do with me as a parent or me as your teacher. So I think that a school experience should mirror that with what the outside world is going to ask of our growing individuals with and without disability.
Yes, that is so true of the school day has a start and an end time. And what about that time outside of the school day, the weekends and just the summertime? And like you said, after they are, out of school, out of high school and out of college, they will be interacting with each other outside of the school setting. So to provide an opportunity within the school day that can, mirror what, the experience they would have outside of the school walls, outside of the school building. That is so important. How it really connects.
Yes, it does. And like 2 points. One is that I'm always very considerate about making an impact on a person that at all lessens their sense of self and their ability to advocate for themselves. And I really fear them taking those experiences and those sentiments and going forward into their adult life feeling less than in any capacity. I want to empower an individual to feel that, in the absence of any types of supports or school, or that they are active in the world around them. So you know it's really important that I follow what their lead is and not impose upon them my own ideas that they have to continue to fight off. And if the memory of that is so damaging that they take it into their adult life, I don't. I know that if I had contributed to that, um, that concerns me. So in truly trying to advocate, I want to lessen the impact of any sort of negative stereotype, because people should feel that they can fully be active in the world around them, that they're making meaning, all on their own, because that is their right. Um, the other side of it is that I remember in having conversations and planning for Nadia, when we were talking about the potential for other types of environments, like a self-contained classroom. One of the thoughts we had was, these are all contrived experiences. The moment you move somebody away from their peers and you start segregating them based on a deficit mindset, you have to replicate everything. It's not just happening organically. You have to now force it to happen. So in trying to communicate this, I said, when I go to Dunkin' Donuts with my daughter, I don't send her to the make-believe Dunkin' Donuts and be like, go practice there. I'm going to the real one. When you mastered, you can come to the real one. I'm like, there's not even room in Dunkin' Donuts budget to set up two next to each
Right.
other. So I just tried to make light of it, but trying to say, hey, we leave the school day at 3 o'clock and we're going to a world that
Hmm.
doesn't have simulated experiences. It's all real on demand.
Right.
So that's what when I think about that, so it motivates me to say we have to really always be thinking about inclusion and integration.
Yes, so true. Yeah, I love that that explanation. Yeah, it's not, there's no make believe, simulated experiences. They're all real within the real world and the community outside of the school. So that's awesome. Um, so as I mentioned, you and we met. I actually attended your presentation at the recent Winter Inclusion Conference that we held in January. And your presentation was titled "The History of the Disability Rights Movement and Person First Language." So this question is really in three parts. So I'll say all three parts, and then if you need me to remind you of what the other parts are, we can go back. So this question is in three parts. So first, can you give us a summary of the disability rights movement, and can you share what did uh, what did the people aim to accomplish, and who were some of the main participants in the disability rights movement? And then, can you get into a conversation of what is person first language and identity first language, and why is it that some people prefer one language over the other? And can you give us a few examples of each type of those disability, identity first, and person first language?
So, with the history of the disability rights movement, the actual movement, when you can track historical events, started in the 20th century. But when you look at individuals with disabilities prior, you see that in the 1800s, when an individual had a disability that could be identified, they were seen sort of as pitiful and a burden. And the act of segregating was almost seen as an easement or something beneficial to do. So removing them from the family was seen as a positive thing to do for that person and for the family. And, you know, the historical record around that just gives horrific examples of what happened to those individuals. But when we come into the 20th century, we see our veterans coming back from war having disabilities and creating a very strong voice around um, around advocating for themselves and their needs and recounting their experiences. So narrative becomes very strong, so we see all of a sudden individual, and that the individual has needs and is willing to speak up for that, and now they're starting to speak up for themselves.
Mhm.
And then when we have the civil rights movement in the 60s and the 70s, advocates for individuals with disabilities really participated in this as well. And we're changing the fabric of society to say that everybody comes to the table with an ability to affect change, to enact rights, be included, to be able to express what their needs are and offer their own talent, um, anything to the structures that we have in our society. And so we see at that time that individuals with disabilities too wanted to count themselves in, and there were critical players in that. There's listen, the list of individuals who have affected change is great. Um, Somebody that I mentioned that I continue to really admire and honor is Judy Heumann, and the work that she did to really voiced the need to create an inclusive society, to make environments accessible. That was pivotal because sometimes disability is more pronounced because the environment in which we're living is so limited. And that if we make our own environment more accessible, someone's potential as a person to be independent becomes greater. And then therefore our definition of disability can change. So really adapting environments becomes so important for us in the movement. Um, an individual, Lois Curtis, the work, she was part of the Olmsted versus LC case where she really advocated for independent living. She had a disability, and she recognized that she herself and advocates who really worked with her that could live independently and can enact their own decisions for their lives, but yet because of her disability, she kept being put into institutions. And so that was a really critical case where we saw that, just the ability to be independent in society, to live independently, to take care of oneself is a right that people possess, and that we can't limit that as a result of the disability that we project onto the person or the extent in which we make it more meaningful than it is for them. So those were important pieces. Of course, with IDEA and how we also shape inclusive experiences in schools, all of those things have changed the landscape for individuals with disabilities. Uh, Sometimes some of the frustration I have as both a professional and a parent is that I wish things worked faster. I wish I could change perception more readily. And but I know that, the more that we hear the voices that are advocating for change, the more change we'll continue to create. And I think particularly in the movement for individuals with disabilities and the advocacy, Frank Stevens, who is an individual with Down syndrome, he always really hit home for me. My daughter uh, uh, does have Down syndrome, and seeing her for a person who has Down syndrome, who's living a very meaningful life is important. And I think he said some of those exact same words, I think, in front of Congress. And that meant something. It meant that he had a life worth living, and that's important. All individuals have a life that's worth living, whether they have a disability or not. So, it's exciting to sit where we sit, where there's so many voices seeing the value in all that we're doing. Um,
Yes.
so that's a little bit about the history, and I think sometimes my experience with history is also very, very personal, just because I've lived it as a parent. So there's certain moments that hit home more than others. And things that still are current today that are very important to look at is making sure that resources that are readily available. I remember when my daughter was going to be born, I met with a social worker in the hospital who had very limited access to resources because it was assumed that maybe I wouldn't keep my child. So when I asked her, I said, well, who do I contact? Do you have more information about that? When she's born, I want to get her services. That wasn't something that they really had. So I think that it's important that we make sure that we're really keeping everybody informed about what benefits a person in general and an individual with a disability from the beginning of their life all throughout.
Yeah, and I think that I think I love that they use the word like movement because it is moving. It's constantly moving, and we still, like you said, you have to keep up to date on things and make sure that the resources are there. Again, it brings me back to my childhood and um, growing into an adult with a disability of spina bifida. I live close to the Philadelphia area. There's a great children's hospital here that has a spina bifida clinic that specializes in children with spina bifida. But as I was reaching adulthood, it was just like, do I still keep going to the children's hospital? Do I move over to one of the other hospitals in Philadelphia? Do I have to go out of this area to find care as an adult? So it's just keeping up to date on on all of the things related to disabilities in the medical world and in other areas as well. It's so important because we are adults with disabilities living life. So yeah, it's so important to have those resources available.
Indeed, like the continuum of supports, the advocacy, it's important that at every stage where services are delivered and offered, that there's as much knowledge about advocacy, about the disability rights movement, um, because it's the individuals that we're interfacing with, like somebody from DVRS or DDD, that they are as committed to the understanding about this journey for an individual with disability and are looking for the least restrictive environment for the most inclusive model. Um, Parenting an individual with a disability who is now an adult, I have found that there are some differences in that understanding when somebody hits 21, and not every organization or institution we're working with is as inclusion focused as from where we came. And so I realized that we're going to continue on in this journey, and our voices need to be heard. Now it's beyond education, it's beyond the school day.
Mhm.
It's all about making sure that the resources available for individuals with disabilities are inclusion focused.
Yes, so important. And the second part of your presentation, it focused on person first language. So, can you share a little bit about what person first language is? And then there's also identity first language. Can you talk about the difference between the two and what, some people prefer one or the other, or, a mixture of the two. So, can you talk a little bit about
Absolutely,
that?
absolutely. So I think that person first language, where we are today, and language changes, so we always have to keep
Hmm.
our finger on the pulse of what is really researched, um, and what we're advocating at current time. But what I understand with person first language is that it's typically a very appropriate space from which to think, because you're looking at the person and you are not driving your dialogue with that individual based on what you see and perceive as important at the time. So when you put person first language and disability together, instead of thinking that this is the Down syndrome person or Down syndrome child, or autistic man, you are saying it is the person. And if you want to include the qualifier with Down syndrome or with an intellectual disability, the person, you're thinking the person therefore becomes more important, and you're allowing them time to tell you what's valuable to them and how you should be addressing them. And I think that that's tremendously important, because when you decide to use the qualifier that is most relevant to you, in this case, the disability, you risk just interfacing with that person based on what you think is important to them, not what is truly important to them. So they're thinking, I'm approaching you on some equal playing ground. I'm interested in talking to you because we both just saw the same movie, or we're both taking the same class together. And
Right.
so now that individual has to overcome the hurdle of recognizing that you're not there to relate to them for that. You're there to relate to them through their disability. And that might not be at the forefront of their mind at that point. So, person first language is acknowledging the person first and including the qualifier of disability after. Um, Identity first language is putting, for the individual with the disability, it's putting their disability first. So I think for those who use identity first language, they have a very enriched understanding as to why they do that. But for me, and just if I'm doing it and speaking for disability, what I understand through the research I do is that in the moment that they are putting it, that is something very important to them. That is something that they identify with. They might be discussing that using identity first language. I am a Down syndrome woman, because that might be an advocacy piece for them. It might be something that they're celebrating. It might be something that they want to put into the arena of discussion and they want you to acknowledge. So we have to honor first what the person really wants in this exchange with us and how they want to be termed. So again, it goes back to that personhood and putting the person in the driver's seat. You know,
Hmm.
it's saying, I want you to see me for this particular quality or characteristic. It's what I'm coming to the table with. This interaction we're going to have together is going to be driven by certain points. So I think that it just depends on the individual, of what's valuable in the moment, and I don't think it should be one or the other. I think that for me, if I would rather wait to be told what's important to that person and identify with them through that lens. And until then, I can just appreciate their personhood as I'm experiencing it. So I guess
Yes.
I would assume in looking at a person, my own daughter who engages with it, it's very fluid. There are times that she just wants to be Nadia in multiple definitions. And there are times that she'd like to think about and refer to her disability and have us engage in that conversation. So I respect whatever's important to her in that moment, as I would for any other individual.
Yes, and it is the most important part. I feel is to ask that person, how they want to be identified and referred to, um, because for some people, as you said, putting their disability first, through identity first, language, is very personal and very important to them. And then for others, it's just, as you said, I want to relate to you because we just saw the same movie, or, we watched the same TV show, or went to
Yeah.
the same concert or something like that. And that is, that's so true. And I always, I always try to ask people, what is your story, instead of saying something like what happened to you or what's wrong with you. It's like it's that same thing. Like you want to know about the person, and what they choose to tell you through their sharing what their story is what you'll find out about them. And
And
yeah, so it's
well,
really
you said
important how you
something,
address things.
indeed, you said something interesting, like you framed something some way like what happened to you, you
Hmm.
know, that at times when we want to know about the disability, we present it as like a deficit focused discussion, like why are you afflicted by this, or
Right.
like you said, what happened, or what are you suffering from? And
Yes.
you're imposing on the dynamic that it is a negative experience, that someone is
Right.
suffering or afflicted or something happened, which always
Yes.
gives you this sense of, is it bad? And
Right.
truth, if you're asking someone to share their story, you have to accept that the narrative around their story is very much their own, and
Yes.
it is a positive experience, one that they live it day in and day out. And you have to be participating on their terms, not with the connotation you want to inflict upon it.
Yes, yeah, that's so true, and we see it on the news, we see it in print, in stories. This person suffering with a certain disability, or and it's just like, no, like they're living life, and they might have some hard days, and everybody has a hard day every now and again. It's like my life. Yeah, I have bad days, and so does everybody else. I'm not suffering with spina bifida. I live with it. Yes, I have it. It prevents me from doing certain things, or I have to do certain things differently. But I manage, I adapt just like everybody else with whatever their challenge may be on a particular day. We're resilient people. We all adapt to, what we need to, and we make life happen in our own particular ways individually, just as everyone else. So that is, it's so important to, have these conversations, and to always refer to the person themselves and ask them, how it is they want to address their disability, because they might not want to. Just,
And,
they may not want to.
and sort of arriving in a place too where you're addressing them outside of the disability,
Right.
that we can see people and not our own biases towards that and whatever has informed that. So, I think that it's important that we continue to also educate in the history of the disability movement, um, and really infuse that into all of our understandings on, um, the experience of people, because the more we educate all people, the better off everybody becomes.
Yes. I have just one final question, and it's something that I'm asking all of our guests in the more recent episodes, and that is, can you share a few resources with our listeners that relate to either person first, identity first language, or the disability rights movement? It can be a book, movie, website, or
Yeah.
anything.
So a book that I keep on hand all the time is Claiming Disability by Simi Linton, and I used it in my doctoral studies. I refer to it now when I'm doing research for professional development. I'm writing. I think it was helpful as a professional, but also helpful as a parent. And so I think, it alludes to the disability rights movement, to experiences in all public spheres and in schools. So I think it's really great to have. It's nice to have some really well-researched pieces that look at all aspects of society, including school, because sometimes I think people get into the box of like there's special ed and then there's gen ed and then there's life, and it's no, everything is really informed. And when we're thinking about the individual, we're thinking about what their civil rights are in that moment, no matter who they are. And so I think Claiming Disability is a great book for that. And I also like it because the title resonates for me. I go back to, again, being a young woman, welcoming a person into the world, and this person had a uniqueness, something that I celebrated, but I recognized others did not celebrate. And I wrote about, at the time in college, like I was still in college at the time, about reclaiming my pregnancy. And it was important that I took ownership back of her life, and gave it the celebration it was deserving of, because she was a person who was going to come into this world and affect amazing change and make her own mark. And I wanted to make sure that I started that advocacy earlier. So I went through a process of claiming it back. And and she has done amazing things. She doesn't fail. And she really represents who she is as a person. Our family continues to represent a diversity that we value. And I recognize that it's because we're part of a world of people who have meaning. And so we should always be looking to help any person around us and acknowledge who they are, that in ways that is meaningful for them. So, this is a really great research book, and it resonates personally for me. So I hope it could help others.
Yes. Yes, and it's so funny. I always have that question, and I'm saying, oh, and this is for our listeners, and I'm like, no, it's really for me too, because I like, I like finding new books. I haven't heard of that book, so I will definitely be adding it to my list, my personal list. So yeah, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I really enjoyed the conversation, and having a chance to catch up with you. We talked briefly at the conference, but to have a conversation with you and to hear more of your story and your passion and for inclusion, and just to make sure that the disability community is part of the conversation in education is so important. So thank you so much for your time today to have this conversation.
Thank you, Arthur, and thank you for allowing me to also represent both somebody who has a professional lens towards this topic, but also a personal one at that. It was nice to
Yes.
reflect, and thank you for giving me the forum to do that, Arthur. It was lovely.
Yes. Oh, great. I'm glad. Yes, and it is so important, to add in your personal, the personal piece of it. I think that is really, really special and so important to share. So, thank you so much.
All right. See you soon. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast. This podcast is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Stay tuned for new episodes of the podcast premiering every 2 weeks. We're all in. Are you?